Hello, and welcome everyone to this taster session for Key Stage 5. Hi, I'm Eleanor, and I am looking forward to talking about A-level English with you and give you a little bit of a taste of what A-level English looks like, both in general and at my ed space. If you can hear me, would you mind just popping a plus into the chat? I can see we've got a couple of people here already. Would you mind just putting a plus into the chat so that I know you can hear me and see me and that we're ready to get going? Today we are going to talk about some unseen poetry, a key part of the specification for A-level literature. And there is an unseen element as well as some seen elements. So I want to introduce you both to the spec a little bit, as well as to the kinds of skills and analysis you'll be looking for at A-level. If you are just starting out on your A-level journey and you have started either this week or last week, or I suppose this month, in school at A-level, and this is a new course for you, don't worry, because I will explain what you need to know for that, and we'll do some work together. Just going to give people about another minute to get started. Wonderful. Okay, well, we are going to get started then. Again, I'm Eleanor. This is me up here. And I am the A-level teacher for English literature at A-level at my ed space. And this is a taster session, a one-off, where you can see what A-level looks like in general, as well as at my ed space and what we can offer you. We are going to be looking at unseen poetry. A little bit about me. I'm Eleanor. I've been teaching for 7 years. I've taught for about 5 years at A-level, both EdXL and AQA. And a little bit about my qualifications. I went to university in the States at University of Pennsylvania and also at Oxford. So I am well versed in literature to help you on your journey of English literature as well. And the third bullet point is just about my American qualifications as well, as I've taught there as well. Hello, is that Faith? Hi, Cherry Pebble, welcome. Nice to see you guys in the chat. If you would like, because this is a free session and it's going out on YouTube, if you'd like to link someone else in who is maybe your new friend from A-level course, or someone else who's thinking about doing A-level literature but isn't quite sure, you can just highlight the link at the top of the page and copy it to them and they'll be able to access it as well. Hi. I'm seeing some more people here. Hi, my goodness. Cherry Pebble, you're Cutie Blade from year 6. This is very advanced work for you, but I'd love to hear your thoughts if you're willing to join. And Love from Clay as well. Hello. This is a A-level stream, if you guys are comfortable with that, to join as well. But if you have any A-level friends or A-level siblings as well who want to join us, then please link them in as well. Right. So I figured at first, especially if I've got quite a lot of, other than my year 6s, quite a lot of year 12s in the course, just explaining briefly what prose and poetry and literature look like at A-level. There are prose, poetry and drama contingents, as well as a coursework contingent in A-level literature. A-level language is a little bit parallel. There are different modules, but you also have a coursework component there, but they're two completely distinct courses. So have a taste of both if you're thinking about doing English at A-level, because there are those two courses available for you. For GCSE, you will be used to your teacher leading study for you, right? Your teacher deciding your texts, your teacher being an expert in your texts and sort of telling you the analysis and the lines of argument that are generally accepted. you do a lot of single word analysis. So things like stars hide your fires might still bring back flashbacks from GCSE study if you did Macbeth, for example. And you link those ideas to other parts of the text, like a springboard, right? You use those little pieces to talk about ambition in Macbeth, or evil in Macbeth, or violence in Macbeth. It's very extract-based at GCSE with references to other sections, but you're really focusing on specific extracts and treating them with time. There's less of an expectation to do independent research. So if you are doing independent research because you are interested in English, then that's fabulous, but it's not usually expected that you're going out and reading criticism about Macbeth, for example, on your own time. Oftentimes, teachers are giving you content to consume and directing you towards those lines of argument or those critics. And then there's occasional engagement with critical theory, so you might have been given a line or two that links into your context for your writer's intention for your AO3, or that boost your analysis. So thinking about Macbeth's evil, for example, or Lady Macbeth with a feminist lens, you might have looked at, but you might not have taken it much further than that. At A level, there is much broader and deeper analysis. So you're not talking about one single line, you're talking about the text as a whole. And you're talking about lines as indicative of a pattern of literature and a pattern of intention across the text. So for example, a motif of blood, or symbolism to do with virginity. For example, I'm thinking of Tess of the D'Urbervilles, of Thousand Splendid Suns, which is some pretty common A-level texts. There are much fewer right answers, so you are doing much more evaluation of grey areas, and you have to be much more nuanced in your argument. You can't just say Macbeth is ambitious, Macbeth is violent, Macbeth is evil. You have to consider all of the different thoughts about someone like Othello, who's a very complex character, and sort of evaluate them for yourself and think, well, there isn't quite a right answer here. These are the different ways you could analyse him. There's much more thematic and character-led work with specific lines of argument. So you develop ideas and then develop them looking at a character and their transition across, or their transformation across a play or a text, or the theme across a text, so themes of nature, of religion, of fate. As I said, you're looking at more patterns, taking a wider view, so you're not, as you are sometimes at GCSE, sort of so stuck in one moment of the text that you aren't thinking about the ending. And the fact that all of these choices in a text are linked to the ending, and that this is all a thread linked through the text. There's much more engagement with sect texts. One of the reasons you have free periods as an A-level student is to do all of that reading and reading around the subject, which means not just reading Othello or A Streetcar Named Desire, but also reading other articles and even books about those texts, and being able to be well informed of the conversations that have been taking place for the last however many years about these texts. The same with you're expected to engage around literary criticism, so you're expected to kind of read Coleridge's famous essay about Othello, or F.R. Leavis's famous essay about Othello, and then be able to cite that as evidence for your own argument, rather than kind of throwing that in as an idea just to support one little piece of argument. And then, as I said, you do coursework as well, which is usually between 20 and 25% of your grade. These are the assessment objectives. As you can see, the language is, if not identical, very, very similar between EdXL and AQA, which are the most common exam boards for A-level English literature. And they expect you to develop a response to the text, develop lines of argument, analyze meaning and how it's shaped in text, so the writer's choices and their effect in how meaning is created, how we understand something in particular. You're expected to look at context and its influence. So how is the time the writer is living impacting who is being presented in the text and what they look like and how they're interacting with the world and other characters. The same with AO4, which is not always used in every question as an assessment objective, because not every assessment is linked to a comparison text, though there is usually for prose comparative text as well as poetry. And then AO5, as you can see, is a smaller percentage of the points, but that is your literary criticism and your engagement with it. Now, let's get started with some questions, and I'll be very, very impressed if any of my Year 6s are here as well in answering these questions. But put your answers in the chat here, and then we will have a little look at what you know about poetry so far. And then we will get into some ideas about a poem I'd like to show you. I'm going to take a moment to talk, as ideally you are popping your questions or your answers into the chat below or to the side. And I just want to explain that if you haven't found it already, there is a workbook for today's lesson. That's the same as for every lesson at my EdSpace. I've made a workbook for you so that you can follow along with the lesson, and that you have all of your notes in one place. They have these sort of ready-made notes by the end of the lesson if you annotate along with me and work along with me, that then you don't have to reproduce on your own time. And you leave every lesson with this kind of study guide to what we learned. And if you're studying the text that we are studying, Othello, Streetcar Named Desire, The Great Gatsby, Handmaid's Tale, poetry, then you will leave prepped to talk about the big ideas and the thoughts in those and around those texts. So those will all be available. As well as that, there's always a homework provided for you to revise what you learned in lesson, opportunities and questions for you to practice for A-level. That's really important that you're practicing writing and writing up and writing analytically, because it's such a leap from GCSE to A-level writing. Each of those comes with a video solution that I make explaining every question, often providing you with a model paragraph or guides for how to attack each question so that you feel supported in what to do. Just taking a look at the chat here. We've got some ambitious answers here so far. Enjambment, okay. One is when you mix some things together to create something. I'm not sure. Ambiguity could be added. Okay, so let's take a look. So enjambment here. First of all, enjambment is when a line of poetry carries on or continues after or onto, I should say, onto the next line of the poem without an end stop. So rather than take a breath as you would do at the end of a line of poetry, that's the convention, isn't it? That you have an end stop. But enjambment is that continuation. The way I remember it, it's silly, but it's like when you have a jam sandwich and the jam squidges out of the bread and runs onto the plate. So it's like the line carries on and runs on over where it should do to the next line of the poem. This is usually to influence the speed of the poem or the breadth of the poem, because you are playing with the conventions and you're carrying on when you're meant to be stopping. So it's building a tone of excitement, of intense tension, of nervousness, etc. Yes, jam. So that jam in the middle is just a little way of remembering for me that might work for you as well. Got it? Then magic realism, or magical realism as well it's called, is a literary genre that adds an element of the supernatural or the element of the magical into an otherwise quotidian or everyday narrative. This was popularized and developed in Latin American and South American literature and has since been incorporated into Western European literature, as well as all different types of literature. It is found, or conventions very like it are found. The language was coined, the name was coined in South American literature, but conventions like it appear all across the world in sort of folk stories, for example, and it is used to kind of disturb convention and disturb comfort. It's often used to critique. So if you know Gabriel Garcia Marquez at all, he was sort of the father of magic realism, and his text, he was from Colombia, his texts often include magic. Okay, what might ambiguity add to a poem now? I can see that someone pointed, Love from Clay pointed ambiguity could be added with metaphors, so there's different interpretations. Yes, so metaphors might add that. It might add different interpretations. Absolutely. It might add a sense of discomfort because you don't know what's true, or distortion. It might add some kind of cliffhanger as well, but I really like that idea of different interpretations, that you are sort of forced to accept that grey area of thing. It's usually, in particular, something to do with morality, right? You're left leaving some kind of moral question that you are forced to negotiate for yourself as the audience. And then, why is voice important to consider in a poem? Yes, Love from Clay, it's like everything is normal, but there's also magic. Yeah, so there's this one magical element that's used to kind of disturb our view of reality and view of normality. Why is voice important to consider in a poem? And I can see as well, Cherry Pebble, you said you can't join tomorrow's lesson because you have swimming. That's absolutely fine. It will be recorded. You'll be able to access it later when you log in on Ocean, so don't worry. Why is voice important to consider in a poem? Because it is what determines perspective, right? It determines perspective. It influences tone. It shows how I would say Cherry Pebble, also the writer, right? How the speaker feels. Suggests how the speaker feels. Oof. Getting in the way of my own writing here. I'll move myself out of the way. How the speaker feels. Then what behaviors are, what actually is voice? How do you describe it? So the voice is the personality or the character who's talking in the poem. So who is actually speaking when this poem is being read out? So whose voice is this that we're hearing when we're reading this poem? Then what behaviors are considered transgressive in society? Transgressive means boundary breaking, whether those be bounds of morality, religion, society. Things like murder, perhaps, is one. Violence, abuse, for example. Anything that we consider is unacceptable in society. Things like, yes, Love from Clay, crime. Absolutely. All of the things that embody crime, we've decided that those are crimes, right? So crimes like murder, violence, abuse are all crimes because we have as a society have decided that they are transgressive, that they are not okay. Yeah, swearing, sure. And then how might guilt affect someone over time? Love from Clay, you're absolutely right. If the poem was written in an older period, you consider things like homosexuality, absolutely. Expressions of sexuality as well, right? If we think of Love's Philosophy or Sonnet 29, if you studied love and relationships poetry in GCSE, then you can think of Absolutely. Sexuality and identity. Absolutely. Then how could guilt affect someone over time? What might it do to someone if they feel guilty for a long, long, long time? I'm thinking it might bother you, right? It might eat at you. It might build over time. It might fester. It might worsen, right? Something to think about as we progress into this poem, okay? If you have any questions, I like from Love from Clay, guilt tends to break you down from the inside, like you lose the sense of things. Yes, so it's really destabilizing. I'm going to add that, absolutely. Absolutely. Might make you think about it again. Yes, you might. Thinking about it again and again over time is called ruminating. So you might ruminate on it. And all this is linked to an idea we have in this poem as well. So this is from an article called Is Survival Selfish? And I'm excited to hear already your reactions to that. Is surviving selfish? Pop your ideas into the chat immediately, and I'm going to read, and I want you to think as I'm reading your reactions to this, so anything you react to this. In his just released book, The Last Train from Hiroshima, Charles Pellegrino quotes one of the survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki atomic bomb blasts as saying that those who survived were, in general, those who looked after their own safety instead of reaching out to help others. This is a quote from the survivor. Those of us who stayed where we were, who took refuge in the hills behind the hospitals when the fire began to spread and close in, happened to escape alive. In short, those who survived the bombs were, in a greater or lesser degree, selfish, self-centered, guided by instinct and not by civilization. And we know it, we who have survived. And then Lane Wallace goes on to say, self-preservation is supposedly an instinct. We may have an instinct for survival, but it clearly doesn't always kick in the way it should. Love from Clay, absolutely. Such a fun question. I know, right? These are the types of questions that you get to discuss in A-level, sort of leaving behind all of those rules and rushing about GCSE study. It feels kind of true when you consider the effects of human life on the planet. Exactly. It could be seen as selfish. Yeah, there are kind of different people who run out of a burning building or run away from an emergency because they panic and try to escape it, and people who run towards a burning building, right? Like people who become firefighters, who run towards that danger in order to help people, right? We hear stories from disasters all the time. Someone who died trying to save other people and trying to carry them out, who ran back into a burning building, for example. Exactly. Fight or flight or save everyone else. Exactly right. So are the people who escape even from something as intense and drastically traumatizing and terrifying and traumatic as the atomic bomb blasts, where a split seconds decision is all you have in order to react before the choice is kind of made for you, of people who are fleeing from the hills, kind of presumably running away from those hospitals where the fires were burning and burning people who could not escape if they were in the hospitals. The people who did survive were the people who were, quote unquote, selfish enough to prioritize their own safety over the safety of others. But this is kind of a human condition question, right? Do we have to prioritize other people? Is it just instinct that we're meant to escape, and that we're animals, and just like animals who flee from a burning building, we're just meant to follow that instinct? Is Hiroshima Japanese? Yes, it is. And if you haven't yet, you hopefully will study World War II in detail in school. But yes, so this is a question that we're asking. Are only the people who will survive nuclear holocaust, will they be the selfish ones? And will all of the people who we think of as heroes, will they be the ones who perish? What do we think about with these ideas of who is a hero in society and what happens if all those heroes are lost to us? Absolutely, nature versus nurture. Yeah, what are you raised to think? I think quite, for the most part, we're raised to think that people are heroes, firefighters, anyone who runs into an emergency and looks after someone. But we're kind of left with that feeling, would we do that? And do we know that we would do that? Or do we just think of ourselves really highly in that way? It's quite a quintessential and existential thought to think. So this is the poem's context that we're going to look at in a moment. By 1943, Italy was suffering. Its early role as an Axis power led to big losses against the Allies, bombing, large-scale military losses, occupation by Germany, political division, and an economy on the brink of collapse meant that many on the home front faced hardship and even starvation. Allied embargoes and bombed farmland meant resources were scarce, and the restrictive dictatorship of Mussolini further rationed food. For families, often there was not enough to go around. Communities often came together to share what little they had with each other. And you can see this image of people lining up for rationed food during the war. And then this is the poem, Roderick Ford's Giuseppe, just a little introduction to it before we get into it. Ford's complex poem captures the desperation of those in war who are often forced to make difficult choices for survival. The speaker relates a wartime story of his uncle Giuseppe's and reflects on the long-term consequences of survival. We're going to get into it in just a moment. I'm just catching up with the chat. Yeah, so people who volunteer to help in a dangerous situation rather than escape themselves. Now, regardless of your experience with poetry, what I want you to do is I'm going to read the poem, and I just want you to mark down for yourself. If you have a copy of the poem in front of you, then you can highlight it, for example. If not, just pop it into the chat. I want to hear it in the chat anyway, so we can discuss it. Hello. Someone else added to the chat. That's absolutely fine. Welcome. We're just about to read the poem that we're going to be looking at. The video is recorded though, so you'll be able to look back at it at your leisure. So, Roderick Ford's Giuseppe. I'm going to read. You just indicate anything that stands out to you. You might not know why, but it's probably done for a reason. So make a note of it anyway, and we will discuss. So, Giuseppe. My uncle Giuseppe told me that in Sicily in World War II, in the courtyard behind the aquarium where the bougainvillea grows so well, the only captive mermaid in the world was butchered on the dry and dusty ground by a doctor, a fishmonger, and certain others. It, had never learned to speak because she was so simple, or so they said. But the priest who held one of her hands while her throat was cut said she was only a fish and can't speak. But she screamed like a woman in terrible fear. And when they took a ripe golden roe from her side, the doctor said this was proof she was just a fish, and anyway an egg is not a child, but refused when some was offered to him. Then they put her head and her hands in a box for burial, and someone tried to take her wedding ring, but the others stopped him, and the ring stayed put. The rest they cooked and fed to the troops. They said a large fish had been found on the beach. Starvation forgives men many things, my uncle, the aquarium keeper, said, but couldn't look me in the eye, for which I thank God. Take a moment just to let that last part of the poem reflect over you, and then pop into the chat some of the lines, parts that you would like to look at in detail, okay? So I'll talk through the poem a little bit, but ideally I want to talk about the lines that you want to talk about as well. Ooh, love from Clay, so quick with immediately this stands out to me that the mermaid is a metaphor for someone who's being discriminated against. Yes, so this whole idea here is kind of allegorical, right? Thinking about the mermaid if we're thinking about this very specific setting of Sicily in World War II, and knowing what we know about Italy in World War II, the sort of slide into fascism with Mussolini and the oppression of so many marginalized groups, namely Jewish people, namely anyone who resisted fascist rule, were persecuted. And so for this to be allegorical for any of those groups that are perceived as fundamentally different from humanity, which is such a reference and an allusion to the kind of wartime propaganda promoted about so many groups, namely Jewish people, namely communists, namely the other in society at the time. Hi, Nilda's crying over AQA. Seeing a shout out from you as well. Hit me in the chat. What lines else would you like to see? Oh yes, this idea of she screamed like a woman in terrible fear. Absolutely. Some other parts I want to talk about here is this part here, these couple of lines. This part here. And some of these parts here, but feel free to pop some in the chat. Any lines that you think, whoa, that's weird. Love from Clay with the analysis. The wedding ring. There's so much here to talk about, right? A burial is when someone is dead, you put them in the ground, or you have last rites of funeral for them and you bury them. Hello. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this, right? This poem there's so much going on in it that we could definitely spend hours talking about it. If you have any ideas, I would love you to put more of them into the chat as we go. Reactions, thoughts, even if they're kind of half-formed thoughts, or just thinking like, wow, that's crazy, I thought this, or this reminds me of what. Give me some ideas, anything you're confused about as well, happy to clarify. So, Uncle Giuseppe is telling him this war story about the only captive mermaid being butchered by the town. Captive mermaid from an aquarium. And it's literally being cut up by the people in the town. Remember, this is Sicily during World War II, so people are starving. And they say, oh, well, it's okay because she's just a fish. She's not a human, she's a fish. So it's okay if we eat her, which is what they're planning on doing. So they cut her up and she's screaming and they're saying, it's okay, she's just a fish. She can't talk. It's an it. Don't worry. And then they take this ripe golden roe from her, which is fish eggs. So rather than a baby, they take this roe from her and they say, okay, phew, proof that it's a fish and not a baby. But when the doctor says this, he doesn't want to eat it. He doesn't want to eat it. Why do we think that is? Then, after she's butchered and dead, they put her head and her hands in a box for burial. Do we bury fish bones? No. So why are they burying her? And this, very interestingly, this idea of the wedding ring from Love from Clay, a symbol of obedience for women, especially at the time women are expected to be submissive to their husbands, so the fact they don't remove it could be a symbol. Absolutely. Also, do fish get married? No. So this is a purely human detail, right? If she is wearing a wedding ring, that must mean that she is human-like enough to understand and engage with other humans or other beings to the level of human marriage. What does that mean about the permissibility of what they ought to be doing and the level of transgression they're committing here? Then, interestingly, again, this kind of narrative in that penultimate stanza, so the second to last. The rest they cooked and fed to the troops. They said a large fish had been found on the beach. And the narrative skews again, right? We start with Uncle Giuseppe told me. Then we have this so they said, etc. Then we have they said this again. But it's a lie. We know it's a lie because we know a large fish hadn't been found on the beach. So how does that influence the rest of our understanding here? And then in the end, we return to Uncle Giuseppe, who can't look us in the eye. Us, the audience, us, the speaker of the poem. And that's what we're left with, that resonant moment at the end where he can't look at me, and I'm grateful for that. Just going to take a look at the chat again because it is going off now. The fact you couldn't look me in the eye means the aquarium keeper is aware that what is happening is wrong, but no one is brave enough to stand up. Yes, so this idea of mob mentality, of complicity, of guilt, right? And the justification of discrimination, the screaming, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable to prove that it's wrong. Absolutely. We are extremely uncomfortable in this poem because she is portrayed as almost entirely human. There are only certain details that distinguish her slightly as inhuman. But she seems human enough for this to be an extremely transgressive and brutal thing to do. Cherry Pebble, yes, they cut up the mermaid because she was technically a fish, but she was still a human. Yes, so what does that tell us about this town? What does this tell us about the straits, the situation they're in? What does this tell us about what they've done if she's technically still a human or close enough to being a human that she can feel and understand what's happening to her? Word of mouth, again, trying to justify their transgressive actions. Absolutely. So let's get into some of these lines now that we've got kind of the ideas of the poem. So my Uncle Giuseppe told me that in Sicily in World War II, so we have immediately this idea of setting here, establishing us and sort of foregrounding the desperation here. Because if this was, hey, this happened in London last week, the context would be entirely different, right? If we return to this idea of, is survival selfish? Is desperation justifiable and starvation justifiable for the greater good, right? For saving the town. So we're immediately located in this very specific setting of do or die, right? And that's intentional because otherwise this poem's transgression and the conflict of guilt and justice here would be extremely different and extremely skewed. That choice of setting is really important. Then we have this detailed visual imagery here that really locates us even further, almost cinematically. In the courtyard behind the aquarium, we're almost like walking through this very seemingly specific, possibly very well known, possibly loved environment that the speaker knows, that Uncle Giuseppe knows, where the bougainvillea, which is a type of flower, grows so well. We have these very specific details that then immediately is so jarringly juxtaposed with this mermaid being butchered on the dry and dusty ground. So this juxtaposition between the settings and what happened here really does lull us into a false sense of security. This visual imagery becomes cinematic as we can picture visual imagery as we imagine so clearly this happening. What does that mean? Why would he want us to picture this so clearly? Perhaps to show how clearly this still lives in Uncle Giuseppe's mind, right? As it gnaws on him and his guilt, right? Or perhaps these ideas that this is something that could happen, that is, likely to happen in situations of in situations of starvation, right? Unjustifiable things otherwise are justifiable. It's hard to put judgment on people who are in starvation mode if we have not been in that position, right? So that immediately again suggests that it's almost distancing us from making judgment, right? Because This could happen to us if we were in the position. Do we know that we would be the only person standing up against the starving townspeople who are our kinsfolk and are our neighbours by stopping them from feeding their families? I don't know, right? Cherry Pebble, not sick, just got a bit of a tickle in my throat. Thank you for your concern, though. Love from Clay, the detail, Uncle Giuseppe can recount the details so well, proves it was obviously traumatic, something that will stick with him that also potentially happened multiple times. Yeah. Is this just the escalation? After this time, what else is stopping us from transgressing further, right? If this is such a transgression, is this the last sort of boundary broken before society devolved into entire anarchy? Then we're thinking about this idea of butcher. That language there is so clinical, and again juxtaposed with the dry and dusty ground. That's not the place where things are butchered, right? They're butchered in a butcher's shop. So the fact that it's on the dry and dusty ground, again, is cinematic because we can imagine that being splattered with blood. But we can also think about that alliteration there, sort of building, and that consonance here even built in tandem to show that this is almost resonant for us. We can hear this echo of what's happening. Perhaps those plosives, the harsh sounds of the D across that line, is almost mimicking the sound of the chopping block, right? And then interestingly, a doctor, a fishmonger, and certain others. Why would a doctor be there? So this figure of the doctor being evidence, proof that she's human. The fishmonger being evidence that she's fish. And then certain others. And this really does sound a little bit judgmental, doesn't it? There's certain others. There's a tone here of avoidance, perhaps. There's a tone of squeamishness. That's hard to say where we are left with these ideas in the poem if we are stuck with this kind of ambiguity, and are we just trying to avoid, we don't want to really acknowledge who's there. We've decided that we don't want to implicate ourselves. Tone of both. The tone of both. Did I say the tone of both? The certain others being sort of judgmental as well as maybe avoidant is what I meant there. And then notice in the second stanza, it had never learned to speak because she was so simple. Immediately, we have distance, right? Through the referential strategies, which means the way that the mermaid is referred to in the poem is both as a she, and then it's almost like the speaker or Uncle Giuseppe corrects themselves and says she, and then distance, it. Why that reframing there? Why that reframing there? I'm seeing Love from Clay, the contrast and the chaos of the butchered versus the calm organization of the people there. Yeah, it's almost as though they've made this decision. We can imagine them sort of walking en masse to the aquarium, having made this decision, being determined to do this for the greater good. Absolutely. She, it, yes. Cherry Pebble, she, it. Yes, this idea that they're saying, oh, let's remind ourselves, let's correct ourselves in our language. It's almost a slip, right, of acknowledging her humanity and then removing it immediately by dehumanizing her, calling her an it. And we never have a name either. Is that because she's a mermaid and doesn't have a name? Or is that because we are distancing ourselves from her here? Yeah, like a Freudian slip, absolutely. And then, interestingly, we have this juxtaposition again. She and it versus they. Where is the power dynamic? And that's a little bit of a typo, apologies for that. The priest versus the her, she. we have a power dynamic immediately between they and her, right? They as a group and she is on her own. And if she's an it, then that dehumanizes and disempowers her further, right? Absolutely. And then this idea, the figure of the priest. The priest is a leader of a community in this time, right? So if the priest is there, then that means that they're condoning this. They're saying that this is morally right, right? People depend on priests and other religious figures to tell them what is the right thing to do. So if the priest is there, that means that the priest is condoning or agreeing or supporting this behavior. Interesting, though, that he is holding one of her hands while her throat was cut. Ambiguity again, because is it holding her hand to comfort her, as a priest does when someone is dying, to comfort her, or is it holding one of her hands down in order to help the people cut her throat by stopping her from biting it, right? That it adds this real tone of fear and uncertainties. We don't know who to trust, right? If the priest is one of the people holding down someone, committing the sin of murder or helped murder, then we don't know anymore what's right. And he is the one who says she was only a fish and can't speak. So he is the one saying it's okay because she's not human. So are we adding an element of critique here to religious figures who are in Sicily at the time supporting Mussolini and supporting the conservative government and are thus complicit in the idea? Interesting, Love from Clay. The sin is justified by the fact that he is comforting her. Yes. Is he sort of absolved of his complicity here because he's comforting her, or because he's saying she's just a fish or only a fish? That only there really being kind of instrumental in saying that she is only something, she's reducing her in power. But she screamed like a woman in terrible fear. Interesting simile there, right? Because it's saying that she's not a woman, perhaps, but she's being compared to a woman screaming. And that really does almost echo in our ear, doesn't it? And the full stop there, and then the space in this choice of breaking the stanza there seems really reflective, right? As a moment of horror. And then when they took a ripe golden roe from her side, this would be fish eggs. In a human, this would be a fetus, right? Or a baby. Does it make a difference if it's fish eggs or a baby? It's tough to say, right? The doctor said this was proof. Again, a leading figure in society, a doctor, said that this was proof she was just a fish. And anyway, an egg is not a child. So here, it's almost as if his voice comes through, the voice of the doctor. Another leader in society. And he is condoning this behavior. And he's an expert, right? He should know about the human anatomy. Exactly, Cherry Pebble. It's what we get caviar from, exactly. So that same idea. So that might prove she's a fish, but does it? And if, again, that but there, the conjunctions adding a kind of tension here and adding a kind of contradiction, but refused when some was offered to him. So people eat caviar, right? People eat fish eggs in lots of different versions. But the doctor who said it was okay, she's just a fish, so you can eat, you're doing the right thing, doesn't want to eat. Why? Why does he not want to eat it if it's offered to him? Exactly. It's the whole back and forth of realizing similarities but not wanting to accept it, so they turn to dehumanization. They want to avert blame. Yeah, they're trying to distance themselves from it. Absolutely. Then it gets even worse. They put her head in her hands, these parts that are so clearly indicative of her humanity, symbols of her humanity, in a box for burial. Do we do that with a fish, as I asked? No. So that means they are implicitly recognizing her humanity. But it's too late, right? They know what they've done is wrong. And someone tried to take her wedding ring, but the others stopped him. This wedding ring, as we've discussed already, this symbol of humanity, but also perhaps a circle, a ring. So this idea of cyclicality, as we said, perhaps this wasn't the only time something like this happened. But also this, her and her wedding ring. She's a woman who's married. Is this possibly a comment on women being sacrificed for the greater good, wives being sacrificed for the greater good in order to preserve others? If we're thinking about feminist criticism, this idea of, as Adrian Rich says, the woman's body is the terrain on which the patriarchy was erected. This idea that the woman is sacrificed in order to preserve the patriarchal humanity. And then this little part here, the others stopped them. So this is a step too far, stealing her wedding ring. And she was buried with it. So again, we acknowledge her humanity here. And this little wedge here that really does throw so much distrust and mistrust into our view of the speak and our view of Giuseppe. Because now we know they're lying about this. What else are they lying about? This is a destabilization here in this part. And I think that's clear through the stanza lengths, right? It's really uneven across how many lines are in each stanza. But then here in this short part, it feels like a breaking point, right? Then starvation forgives men many things. Again, notice this is the first time we've had men here as a group. So it's men who are doing this, or humankind who is doing this, but it's a woman mermaid. There's a bit of tension in gender here as well. Then my uncle, the aquarium keeper. That was a detail he didn't say at the beginning. What was an aquarium keeper responsible for? Taking care of the aquarium, right? If he didn't stop this, if the mermaid was butchered, who is to blame here? Some people more than others? Giuseppe more than others? Yeah, that kind of parenthetical thought, Cherry Pebble, absolutely. And couldn't look me in the eye, for which I thank God. These last two pieces here. Evasive, guilty, slippery. Is he not looking in the eye because he's ashamed? Because he's lying? Because he can't face it himself? Because he's haunted? We don't know. And also, the speaker doesn't know. They're grateful that he couldn't. Are they grateful that he feels ashamed? Do they not want to know the truth? Or are they just trying to avoid? So in a way, are they as complicit as these certain others who knew something was wrong here but didn't do anything? The cyclicality here of complicity. As soon as you're involved, if we don't stand up against things, then are we those selfish survivors? If the uncle in Sicily during World War II hadn't survived, would the speaker be alive? We don't know, but maybe not. So maybe they are complicit in this as well. What about the title? What about the title? Giuseppe. Immediately we have distance. It's not Uncle Giuseppe. It's not uncle. We also have location, right? This is an Italian name. Is he a product of his environment? As I think it was Love from Clay said, this nature versus nurture. And not just nature versus nurture, but product of a desperate environment, right? Is this one name as blame? Or is this something that could be transposed onto other people's experience, right? Is evil lurking around the corner for everyone? if they're in these specific circumstances. And then what ideas appear in the poem here? We've got ideas of guilt. We've got ideas about power, about gender, about society, about violence, about blame. Exactly, love from Clay. It's a pretty common Italian name, linking to the presumed commonality of the situation. Absolutely. We got this idea of justification, of truth, of complicity, of despair, of death. Shame, Cherry Pebble, very nice. So much here, right? And this is where I think we will have to leave our ideas here. I did it for the greater good. Could Giuseppe, could you allow your entire community to die and starve, including the troops who are trying to defend your town from fascism, just to save a mermaid who we're not sure is even human? Or are some things just unacceptable no matter what? It's like the trolley car problem in sociology or psychology, right? Do you save one person or the 50 people? Does that, if you kill one person in order to save 50 people, does that justify the killing of one person? Is it ever justifiable? Right? These are some themes in the poem. So if we had a little bit more time, we could link to ideas of violence, of society and power, of guilt, right? And then through this, what is the moral of the poem, right? So hit me in the chat. What do you think Ford is hoping to say to us in the poem? Granted, Ford is a modern, contemporary poet. So what is he trying to say to us in 2025 about society or about life through this poem? I will give you a moment to pop this into the chat. I would love to hear some thoughts on what's the point of this poem, essentially, here. Cutie Blade, thank you. Nice to see that you have joined us. I'm glad. And thank you for all your contributions. And as you're typing, I would like just to let you know that we've got some info for you. This, of course, was a taster session for Key Stage 5 English. For our main course on Key Stage 5, we'll be teaching it all across the year. It doesn't fall into the confines of any exam board. It's a 1-year taster or 1-year main course for A-level that incorporates as many of the big ideas for the main text as we can do. Yeah, QC Blade, not the course for you right now, but I'm glad that you will be in my Year 6 class. These are the things it offers at A-level: 2 engaging live and interactive lessons each week, just like this, video recordings, workbooks, practice with exam-style questions, detailed video solutions. Does it work? Yes. A-level results from 2025 shows that my EdSpace students achieved A star through B grades at a significant portion higher in all of the main subjects. How much is it? This is £80 a month for you, but now you have an opportunity for 44% off. Currently, your discount is £449 for the entire year of lessons. That is 3 hours a week, and video solutions, homework, workbooks, and support. We can split that into installments for you depending on how you'd like to pay. There's also a no-risk 14-day guarantee, so you can join us for the first 2 weeks, that would be this week and next week, and decide if you like the course or not. If it doesn't suit you, no hard feelings. We will absolutely give you your money back, guaranteed. Here is the link for it. And I'd love to hear in the final moments, this is the QR code for your deal. So I'll pause here for a moment. But if anyone else has any morals for the poem, what Ford is trying to say here, I'd love to hear. I can see that that Cutie Blade said that life is not easy. You can face things that might cause bad things to happen. Yes, so this kind of descent into transgression and dehumanization is so kind of close to our reality. In some ways, there are people starving and in crisis all around the world. What justifies transgression that extreme? Does anything? Can we speak on that if we're not in that position ourselves? We might be too privileged. We might be complicit in being too protected in order to judge those circumstances. Love from Clay. Out of the bag. What a poem. Out of the bag is a tricky one, Seamus Heaney. Don't worry though, there is ambiguity as one of the arguments for that poem is definitely a line of argument that's meant to be confusing because it is a child trying to understand things like childbirth, which you can't understand. So it is confusing, and Heaney trying to replicate that child's perspective is part of what that confusion is. Cutie Blade, I'm not sure that you're able to join Year 12 and Year 13 lessons unless we have another taster session, but I have content made just for you as a Key Stage 2 student, so don't you worry, there will be furthers and betters for you as well, and it will be hopefully just as interesting for you, and we'll be pushing you just as hard as A-level students, so don't you worry, and I hope that in a couple of years you will be taking A-level English now if you're so ambitious as to join this now. Thank you, hello, for making the effort to join, even though this was at midnight for you. That's amazing. Do feel free to rejoin that beginning of the lesson on the recording if you feel you missed anything. But so wonderful to have such ambitious students here for you as well. Thank you, Love from Clay, as well for your work. You will be fine with Out of the Bag. You've got some great ideas already. I'm not worried about you. And thanks so much, everyone. As our lesson has ended, I'm going to end the stream now. But any further questions, the chat should be live for another couple of minutes if you want to contact me. If not, this is my YouTube channel, so you'll be able to contact me if needs be. My information is in the bio. Bye for now.